All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me today as we host a session of Every Child Ready to Read at your library. This Every Child Ready to Read workshop that we're giving, while a normal workshop completely within the purview of the Division of Library Development. Did I say my name? My name is Kim Powe. I'm the Children and Young Adult Consultant with the Connecticut State Library. Is actually, we're sort of building it into a workshop series kind of initiative. For anyone familiar with gels, you know that sometimes we sort of smush things together just sort of to paint a clearer picture of the purpose behind a bunch of workshops that we offer throughout the year. That's kind of the same thing happening with Every Child Ready to Read right now. We've started an initiative here called CT, Ready to Read. You see our little logo up at the top. And it's going to be a series of workshops, trainings, presentations, and resources, all for librarians to help us help children and their caregivers as we're prepping kids to read. There's a large amount of kids sort of on a global level, whether we see it in our community or not, who don't necessarily go to preschool, who don't necessarily go to daycare for a multitude of reasons. And maybe the parents and caregivers just don't have sort of all of the terminology and all of the language, and just don't know all of the things that they could or should be doing with their kiddos, to sort of prep them so that when they do start school, they are ready to learn to read and they've gotten some of those foundational things out of the way. And we in public libraries are beautifully positioned to help out with some of that. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And my first kind of question for you all, has anyone here ever gone through an Every Child Ready to Read training before? You can just drop it in the chat, unless someone wants to say something, which you also can, I think. Have I allowed people to unmute? Yeah. But yeah, if you can just drop in the chat, yes, no, a long time ago, but I don't remember. Just have you gone through Every Child Ready to Read training before? Cool, cool, cool. Great. Oh, how fun. Okay, so we're starting from scratch. I kind of love that for us. So we are going to just start with an overview of what this is then, since, well, we would have done it anyway, but it sort of puts me in a position to kind of know who it is that I'm talking to. So, Every Child Ready to Read, what is it? Because we serve children for a lot of years before they even begin school. Public libraries, sorry, I'm going to raise my chair a little bit. Public libraries have a lot of opportunities to provide early literacy learning and early literacy experiences for kids. So in 2000, the Association for Library Services to Children, also often called ALSC, and the Public Library Association, also called PLA, looked at what they could do to help children develop early literacy skills and to be better prepared to learn once they started school. And they were looking at this specifically from a public librarian perspective, where sort of our backgrounds and our learning are different from folks who are going into the educational sector. So ALSC and PLA basically concluded that public libraries had the potential to have an even greater impact on early literacy, through focusing on educating parents and caregivers. So for those of us who offer story times, we might offer them once or twice a week. We might see families that come into one or both of our story times. But what we know is, especially in that age group, if the kids are not going to preschools or daycares or whatever all the time, they are spending the majority of their time with whoever their grown-up is. So what PLA and ALS concluded was that one of the best things that we could do was set librarians up to actually educate those grown-ups in the children's lives so that they could sort of better help and work with kids while they were at home. So if the primary adult basically in a child's life can learn more about the importance of early literacy and how to nurture early literacy skills at home, then the effects that the librarian does and the library does in those story times, in those trainings, could be multiplied, right? So the parents and caregivers are doing things at home. The librarians are sort of working within those group educational spaces. So if we could combine that to the stars, right? Um, so the focus on educating parents and caregivers was a really new approach at the time in 2000. And the folks at ALSC and PLA did a lot of work to introduce the Every Child Ready to Read initiative in 2004. And public libraries and public librarians all over the country have been using this to educate parents, grandparents, childcare providers, right? Like the aunt, right? That sort of helps a grown up, with their child. This has been used for years. Oops, there we go. So basically, we're with an Every Child Ready to Read. We're working from the perspective of the fact that teaching parents and other caregivers how to support the early literacy development of their children was the basis for the first edition of Every Child Ready to Read at your library, because there have been two, and we're going to go over both of them. So, the Every Child Ready to Read workshop, right, presents strategies for developing early literacy skills within the framework of 5 early literacy practices. And those 5 practices are talking, oh, typo, please ignore, singling, that's not what that should say. Talking, singing, reading, writing, and playing. Those are the 5 early literacy practices. And again, I have all of that and sort of what that means on this LibGuides page that I just dropped in the chat again for you. The 5 practices are familiar, right? Those are familiar terms, which makes them easier to use and which in theory makes them easier to integrate into everyday life. It's not just reading and repetition and flashcards and all of that. All of these other initiatives, singing, playing, also work towards early childhood and sort of prepping for reading practices. And the 5 practices, as they are easily adapted and can be used within the different stages and developmental ages of childhood. So Every Child Ready to Read, the second edition, emphasized the importance of, vocabulary and background knowledge and comprehension and sort of how all of this tied together. And they really highlighted the importance of stimulating learning environments. Is also highlighted, right? And so the library is one of those learning environments, which puts us in like a really unique position where we're often interacting with children, sometimes from weeks old, right? And they actually put together the world's biggest binder here. And essentially, what we're going over is a very condensed version of everything that is in here, which can be borrowed from the service center if anyone's interested in reading all the words. So, children's reading success in school starts with positive language and literacy experiences, which begin at birth, right? So if children develop pre-reading skills before they start kindergarten, when they get to kindergarten or first grade, whatever it is, they can focus on learning and reading once they begin school, as opposed to learning those pre-reading skills at school and potentially starting a little bit behind other students. So the kids who start kindergarten ready to learn to read, right? They may not be reading at 5, which is okay, but they are ready to learn to read. They're going to have greater success throughout their sort of entire school age career. They're more likely to read at or above grade level by the end of the 2nd grade. And children who are reading at or above grade level by the 4th grade are more likely to graduate from high school and go on to be successful readers and learners, which we're actually seeing as a problem now, sort of within our millennial age group of some people, in my age bracket having around an 8th grade reading level, right? So we're already seeing some of this, and it's just kind of magnifying and growing from there. So learning to read, what we're going to talk about a little bit, actually involves 2 key sets of skills: decoding and comprehension. Those are sort of the 2 main areas of focus with regards to learning to read. Children need to be able to learn to decode print, and they need to understand that the words that they hear and the words that they say, that is language, right? So these words that maybe they learn to say at 2 or 3 years old, food, more, milk, mom, dad, right? Those are then print words on a piece of paper. Um, but what we also need is for children to learn to comprehend what that print says. So they need to know that food, that word that they learn and know so well, is also FOOD on a piece of paper, right? So that's also sort of like a print recognition portion to that. But basically, both of these skills are really vital towards helping set up kids to read. And sometimes what happens in librarianship is we sit in one space and not the other. But sort of this really random slide before we get there, I just want to sort of quickly touch base on like baby brains, as I like to call them, before we talk a little bit more about decoding and comprehension. Um, we all know that like a baby's first teacher is sort of the adult in their life, right? Or the first years last forever, or I learned everything I needed to know in kindergarten, right? Like we've sort of learned through these phrases and through these little sayings that the very first years of a child's life can often be the most important and sort of set them up for what the rest of their life looks like. And that's really important. And it's definitely something that we need to keep at the forefront of our mind. It's also important to just kind of balance the way we say that and have those conversations with the grown-ups in a child's life. If a grown-up feels like maybe they haven't done all that they can do or like spent enough time or this, that, or the other on these early literacy skills, sometimes it can make them feel really bad. And sometimes a message can be sent, and I've actually heard it from librarians, and it makes me a little nervous. Oh, if they haven't learned all this by third grade, there's just nothing we can do. How awful, right? Like your kid's never going to learn to read. And that's not necessarily true. Even as we talk about some of these concepts and skills and the developmental stages and kind of those steps, right? That are important, but also it's not the end of the world. We just really want to make sure that when we have these conversations with grown-ups and parents and caregivers, that we're not like discouraging them on accident. So just like a random, like, I don't know, I couldn't figure out where to say that or put this slide. So come on. All right, let's pivot. So not all reading skills are equal, which I think is a really strange and unusual concept that we're maybe not used to. So research that was done by a Dr. Scott Parrish in 2006 pointed to skills that have what they called short-term and long-term impact on becoming a good reader. And these are essentially, they've been boiled down to calling constrained skills and unconstrained skills. What are those? So constrained skills have a fixed endpoint. So once you have mastered whatever that skill is, there is no more to master, which I think is sometimes kind of contrary to what we think, particularly in libraries. The learning never stops. The learning never ends. There's some learning that stops, actually. So for example, the alphabet, right? Once a child recognizes the letters, the 26 letters of the alphabet in all the formats that they come in, which is also important, uppercase, lowercase. Sometimes the A has that little thing at the top. Sometimes it just has a little tail at the bottom. So for example, once a child has learned the alphabet in all of the form, maybe cursive, I don't know, I know that's a big thing right now, has learned the alphabet in all of its forms, there's no more alphabet to learn. There's no more English alphabet to learn. A is always A. F is always F, right? Even if it presents differently depending on uppercase, lowercase, penmanship, and things like that. So the age for, if we're sort of sticking with letters, that a child is typically going to learn something like letter sounds or what those actual letters are might vary. My brother learned W very early and latched onto it for a very long time. It was his favorite letter. Most children are going to sort of learn some of those letter sounds and some of those other constrained skills by about the third grade. By about the third grade, that's about when these things are learned, and they're, unless there's some sort of really unforeseen circumstance, they're learned. That's it. You know them, right? But then there are unconstrained skills. And sort of those constrained skills are learned during the decoding process. Now, unconstrained skills include things like vocabulary and comprehension. They do not have an endpoint. There is always another word to learn. There is always some new weird rule in English where this letter makes the sound and this letter doesn't, and those two make, right? So that vocabulary aspect is different from that letter recognition aspect, and things like vocabulary and comprehension never stop. Unconstrained skills take a lot longer to learn. And as children continue to have literacy experiences, their acquisition of things like vocabulary and skills to comprehend, comprehension skills, are going to accelerate, are going to be better, they're going to be faster at it. And they're ultimately going to be better at learning to understand what it is that they're reading. So, whoops. Parents and caregivers can help their children develop constrained and unconstrained skills, and we as librarians can help them develop constrained and unconstrained skills. And how do we do that? We as librarians in particular. There was a first edition of Every Child Ready to Read. That was kind of moved on from because of the technical jargon. And sort of what I am beginning to wonder is if that technical jargon can help guide us as librarians. So instead of sing, talk, read, write, play, right, which is in that second edition, the first edition of Every Child Ready to Read had phonological awareness. When I first saw that word, I had absolutely no idea what that meant. That meant nothing to me. Apparently, it's the awareness of and the ability to work with sounds in spoken language. Well, we do that, right? Think about, books with rhyming words, bat, cat, hat, right? Or alliterations, big, bold, brown bear. Syllables, right? Also fits into that phonemic awareness, sort of clapping out syllables with kids, like elephant. All of those things, breaking down words like that, identifying rhyming words and alliterations, all of that helps to build reading skills. I didn't know what I was doing. If that just so happened to be in the rhyme that I took from Jaybrary, then that's sort of like what was going in my story time, right? Like that's what I knew. And then there is print awareness, right? Noticing print, how to handle a book, how to follow words on a page. Well, it's like, oh, so is that maybe kind of what we do when we have like board book sets that we give to kids if we're reading like a book, like a board book in our story time? That's when we let them, sort of hold. I'm sure I got a book somewhere. This is not a board book, but I have it. That's when we let them sort of hold it as we're reading to the group, and maybe bang it, and maybe, open it up and turn the pages. That's when the grown-up corrects them because they're holding the book upside down and it should go the other way. Print awareness, right? If you're reading to a young person and you're running your finger along the lines of the book so that they, in theory, can see and hear the word at the same time, print awareness. Oh, we do that. Vocabulary. Well, I don't know about this room, but weirdly, one of my favorite movies is The Color Purple. And there's this spot in The Color Purple where the, one sister is teaching the other sister how to read. And so she puts the labels of the words on the object. So she writes window and puts it on the window. She writes the word hair and attaches it to her hair. She writes the word shoe and attaches it to the shoe. We might not do it that way in libraries, but I know what that is. But when I see print awareness, I don't know what that means. Right? Vocabulary, vocabulary, right? Something that we know. Like that's sort of what that is, the knowledge of naming items and sort of having all of these words to use for expression. Letter knowledge, again, seeing that letter, knowing that W is a W when you see it, unless it's an M, but that's its own problem. Print motivation, that's something that we work on a lot with our older readers. Being interested in reading, right? Having a story for every child, having something to interest someone at every level, right? Be that those, sports books or books with magic. If someone just wants to read only unicorns for a while, right? It's sort of doing whatever it is that we have to do to keep them and get them interested in reading. Narrative skills, being able to describe things. So when you hold up a book, or if you're in a story time and some kid just goes off telling you about what the person on the page in the blue shirt, they're picking that apple, miss, and I think they're going to eat it, right? So sort of where we see those kids kind of like run off and sort of dive into a story. All of these terms, phonological awareness, print awareness, vocabulary, letter knowledge, print motivation, narrative skills, these were the terms that were used in the first edition of Every Child Ready to Read. But similar to the fact that I didn't know what these words meant, both. So vocabulary is going to be the context of the spoken language and the print language. There's a lot of overlap here, and we're actually going to get to a point where I think maybe it's in a couple slides, where we tie in the terms in the second iteration and tie them to the first. But when we're talking about vocabulary, it's knowing that this is an orange, it's a cutie, but right, knowing that what this is, but then also sort of being able to recognize it. A lot of these terms play and exist within themselves and within each other, which actually at the end of the day makes our jobs and our lives a little bit easier. Wait. There we go. So the reason that there's such a variety, right, and sort of what's been presented within the first edition and the 6 early literacy skills and the second edition and the 5 practices is all of those terms in that first row are really hard to remember for the average grown up, right? That's not a teacher or that's not a librarian. They're hard to remember. It might be hard to figure out how to quote unquote do them with your child, as opposed to you can get in the car and start singing a song with your child and sort of understanding what that is. And sitting down and playing with crayons or markers and writing with your child, it's easier for a grown-up to know what that is. So that's sort of why Every Child Ready to Read sort of switched up sort of the presentation of their language. But the fact of the matter is that the 5 practices support the 6 early literacy skills. And a conversation that we've been having within youth services on sort of a statewide level is maybe it's important for the parents and the caregivers to just sort of have those terms of the 5 practices. But when we, as literary educators, librarians, are building our programs and our services and our experiences for the early literacy age group, would there be a change in the way that we approached whatever that looks like if we approached it from the perspective of knowing these 6 early literacy skills and how they embed in what it is that we are offering to these families? For example, songs, right? Songs are a really natural way to learn about language. Songs help children develop listening skills and pay attention to rhymes and rhythms of spoken language. Most songs have, a different note for each syllable, and that has the potential to help children break down words so they hear individual sounds and they begin to learn the sounds that make up a word, right? So sort of like clapping out elephant, elephant. There's nuance because this is English, so that PH and that F, that's a really bad example, but for some reason, it's the only word I have in my head right now. But sort of the breaking down of words within spoken language, it begins to, like we said, it might not be teaching a child to read, but it's teaching them those pre-reading skills so that when they do get down to the nitty-gritty of learning to read, all of that background work has been done already. Singing also slows down language, so a child can hear the different parts of the word and they can notice how words are alike and are different. Now, for folks who've gone to whoops, sorry about that. I'm just trying to let someone into the room. So for folks who have been to different trainings that might have sort of like songs and early literacy, you might have begun to hear, you might hear the suggestion to not sing with like a tape or not sing with music, right? To just use your own voice, which then opens up the door of like, I can't sing, I'm tone deaf, something. But part of the reason that that's suggested is so that you can purposefully slow down a song so that the young kiddos can hear the different words and hear the syllables and hear the sounds and hear the alliterations. And sometimes, if a song is too fast, it's harder for them to do that. And then that's going to be magnified if some of the people in attendance at your story time or program are not native English speakers. So then you've already got, little kiddos and their little kiddo brain that are trying to keep up. But then when you mix in folks who are not native English speakers, even if they do speak English, right, it's just harder to keep up. So that's one of the reasons why that's suggested. If you've heard that and you're like, I don't want to, it's just something to consider. And basically, at the end of the day, singing helps children learn new words, right, and add to their general knowledge. Um, and then, right, talking. So we're just sort of going through. So basically, sort of what I'm trying to illustrate is that we've got, one of those terms, right, singing as a talk of sort of as a part of sort of those second iteration of words, but then within just the one act of singing, you've got all of these literacy skills that have been embedded in this one act, right? The phonological awareness, vocabulary, narrative skills, depending on the song, there could be more. And the same goes for all of the rest of those those terms. So talking, telling stories, stretching conversations out, those are all ways that children learn new information, new vocabulary, right, and some of these other literacy skills. So conversations between grown-ups and kids, librarians and kids for that matter, right, just sort of when you're at the desk, like meandering through your space, are some of the best ways to help children learn new information and learn information. I didn't know pterodactyl started with a P. In my late 20s, I did not know that until I think a 7-year-old told me, because I was trying to use the glossary and I couldn't find pterodactyl. And he's like, Miss, it starts with a P, not a T. Lesson learned. I'll never make that mistake again. But sort of the concept of having conversation with your child, you speaking to them speaking to you, as opposed to them just sort of being the receptacle for listening, also goes a long way towards building some of those vocabulary and narrative skills in particular. Things like using new words are really helpful. So, if a child is upset, for some reason, and maybe they're able to tell you that they're sad, right? Maybe, those are things that we sort of learn: sad, mad. We try to sort of instill those in kids as soon as we can. Um, a kid says, I'm sad. Oh, are you frustrated? Right? So you're still talking to them, you're hearing them, you're speaking with them, but you found a way to sort of slide a new word in there that not only builds on their vocabulary from like a learning to read standpoint, but also a communicative standpoint. They're sad because I hurt myself. They're sad because I'm frustrated. They're sad because I'm scared, right? So, sort of using just really simple moments that aren't a huge deal at all, to begin to instill some of these vocabulary words in children, is really important and kind of just like always around us. And it's helping us make connections when we're talking to kids. If you are having a conversation with a kiddo, doing things like remembering something that happened, recalling past events, connecting them to things that are happening right now. All of that is interdependent and interconnected. And when we share with grown-ups, singing, talking, we might not be breaking it down specifically for them that, by talking to your child, you are building phonological awareness and narrative skills, right? Maybe we're not saying that, but if we know that from our perspective, it might change the way that we sort of interact when we're with groups of kids. There is definitely a fine line between having a conversation in story time that derails the entire day and just erupts into chaos, and having a quick conversation that builds vocabulary skills and narrative skills with our young kids. Sometimes it's okay to talk about the guy picking an apple from a tree in story time. It's all right to deviate. And then, right, good old reading, right? What's reading doing? It's developing vocabulary and comprehension and, print motivation and all that. It's hitting all of those skills. And this is something I think I'm probably going to preach to the choir here, but like no matter what age a child is, reading with your child or sharing reading is one of the most important things that you can do. Like singularly, it's almost one of the most important activities that a person can share with a child to develop a lot of these reading skills. But also, you can take it a step farther and reading books that introduce kids to words that they might not hear in their everyday life, especially if they're around that age where we're still doing a lot of baby talk. Simplifying words so that we can teach them to communicate with us, especially during that time, every once in a while, having a moment where you can introduce a child to a new word that they don't hear every day is always a good thing. And we've seen it. Like we've seen, sometimes we think like, oh, this is too advanced for a kid, or a grown up might say, oh, I don't know if I want that picture book. I think it's a little too advanced for my kiddo. We know that it might not be, because somewhere there's a 3-year-old that knows the scientific name of every dinosaur that has ever existed, ever. At 3, they can tell you all about them. They can pronounce all of the words that I can't in my mid-30s. So sometimes, right, if we have this knowledge and if we understand maybe using some of these more fancy words, narrative skills, letter recognition, print awareness, when talking to our kiddos or when talking to our adults, we can explain that, I know it's a Patricia Polacco, but like it might be okay for you to read to your 4-year-old, and here's why. But also sharing reading from an early age is what's really going to help develop that love of reading. Um, that as librarians we all want. We don't want children to hate reading or sort of be afraid of it or cry every time they have to read. I think a lot of us understand the beauty in reading, and the mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors and all of that, and we just want to share that with the members of our community, from the oldest member in our community all the way down to the youngest. This is going a lot faster than I thought it would. And then writing, right? So again, we're using these simple terms that we explain to our grown-ups. Oh no, well, sorry, I cut off some of these words. I'll fix that slide. Reading and writing go hand in hand. One goes right along there with the other, and both are ways to represent spoken word and to communicate information to each other and to their grown-up. Children become aware of and sort of recognize that printed letters tie into words that they are seeing, those squiggles, right, that they might not immediately recognize really early on, especially if we're constantly bringing it to their attention. I'm 9 years older than my brother and 12 years older than my sister. So I really watched a lot of this happen as a kid and didn't really understand what was going on. And at some point, for some reason, I don't know why I started to do this. Whenever we came to a stop sign, I wasn't really talking to him. I was mostly talking to myself, bored because there were no cell phones in the car. And I hit a stop sign and I would say, STOP, stop. We drive, go to the next stop sign, STOP, stop, from a bored 10-year-old in the car. And then at one point, we pulled it to a stop sign, after weeks of sort of like doing this on and off. And my little brother, we hit a stop sign. He goes, STOP, stop. Right? Now, could he read? No. But did he understand that these words, these sort of letters, these squiggles tied into, he was able to draw the comparison. Did he fully understand what he had done and what he'd said and what he'd seen? I have no idea. He's actually the smartest of all 3 of the siblings, so maybe he did. But again, it's developing those pre-reading skills. So when a child is of developmentally appropriate reading age, all the before work has been done. And our last one, playing, which sometimes gets the worst rap. There are some folks who maybe don't see the comparison between playing and reading, and that's wrong. Play helps children think like symbolically, I think is maybe the best way to say it. Play is actually one of the best ways for children to learn language and literacy skills. When children are playing, a ruler becomes like a wand or like a magic sword or a broom, right? Today, the day that we're in becomes a day where there are dinosaurs, running around the playground. And really it's through play that kids begin to understand that like items attribute to things, that like one thing can be attributed to something else. They begin to understand, especially as if we're working to also do some of that word recognition, maybe running your finger along a word while you read it, that word correlates to an object, right? Broom, broom. Pretend play also helps kids develop oral language skills, and those oral language skills tie deeply to written language and vocabulary and things like that. So when kids are playing whatever, Lightning McQueen, I don't know, the language that they're using as they're talking to each other, all of that, even though it might look chaotic, right? Like while they're running around outside or quite frankly, running around inside and, using plates as whatever, right? Like in the library play area, all of that dramatic play is helping to develop narrative skills. And anytime we incorporate that play into our activities, story times, whatever that might be, we're doing that as well. And to sort of help our parents and caregivers understand that, those are things that we can say as we're doing them, as we're pulling out the parachute and beginning to sing, popcorn. Though that's information that we can pass along to parents, but we're going to get to that in a little bit. So I gave folks the heads up. We're going to do just two breakout activities. Nothing super scary, I promise. So what we're actually going to do, and I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording because this isn't helpful for people who are watching it. So we're going to break into small groups, and we're going to, what I hope is actually crowdsource ways to embed the 5 practices into a story time. So you're going to work in groups, and you're going to come up with ideas for promoting one of the 5 specific practices into a story time. And I want you to be as specific as you can, not just like I sing the hello song, because there are a million of those. What's the song, right? Like what are the lyrics, and how is this song helping to embed some of those literacy skills, or how are some of those literacy skills supported? And if you could decide on 1 or 2 in your little groups, and then someone to share back. And if we're super shy, I'll even let someone type it. Like that's okay. I don't want to sort of like make people too anxious as someone who gets anxious myself. But we're just going to practice this a little bit. My goal is so that if some of you decide that you do want to restructure some of your activities and services like a story time to mentally incorporate the skills that these young kiddos know how to do. I don't want the first time you try to do it to be by yourself, right? This is sort of, I'm hoping that working together will help folks with that a little bit. So I'm actually going to stop sharing just so that I can pull things together. And for folks, I know I've been kind of letting people in a little bit as we've been doing our presentation. The literacy skills that we've been going over, the practices that we've been going over, all of those terms and what they mean are on the Every Child Ready to Read LibGuides page. Sometimes it's helpful, right, just to have those sort of words and what they mean as reminders, especially for folks who this is their first time going through the Every Child Ready to Read training. And I'm going to very quickly break you up into about 3 breakout rooms. I'm going to try to really quickly, forget it. I'm gonna just let it sort of, oh no, I lied. Okay, so I'll have to do it really quick. While I'm throwing these rooms together really quick, are there any questions about some of the stuff we've gone over? This is a lot of words. These are a lot of terms. So just while we're here, is there anything that I can provide some clarity on. And they're also, this isn't taking anywhere near 2 hours. I had no idea how much time it would take to get through this. So there will also be some time at the end to have some open conversation if folks find that helpful. I want to make sure that your needs are met. Oh my God, I'm just like randomly clicking. Okay, there. And then I should have had it manually assigned. I don't know what I was thinking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5. And one room is going to have 6. I think. Did I do it right? 5, 10, 15. I don't know. Nope. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to open the rooms. You should go into your rooms. I put on my slide that you have about 10 minutes. I'm going to give it about 15 so that you can come up with as many of these as possible. The goal is if you want to begin to try to build some of these skills into your activities, you don't have to do it for the first time by yourself. So I'm going to open these rooms. You should have chat available there. So I know there are some folks who have their cameras off. If you can't speak, do the best you can to sort of participate. And I hope this is helpful. Have fun. Let me set a timer. Did I not give you a room? Oh, I think it's a little frozen. Oops. Good question. You put the initial slide with the terms up in the breakout room.
I know a lot of people do that with, could be on paper, could be on slides, whatever. So that might be one.
There she is. Okay, so we'll muddle through and we'll see if someone wants to sort of jump in from each group to do a share out. So let's start with group 1, April, Emily, Jessica, and Michelle. I hope I pronounced that right. Does anyone from your group want to share what you talked about?
I can. So people brought up a lot of great things that we're already doing in our story times, that like knowing the those 6 skills, we kind of like pointed out which ones we were trying to hit. And so we talked about, when reading a picture book, pointing to things on the page and asking kids what they are, and that being sort of vocabulary development, and also asking predictive questions about stories, being sort of building those narrative skills. We talked about the singing, and oftentimes doing singing where we're learning vocabulary by doing different body parts or asking them to move in a certain way. Those building those like what the words actually mean awareness. April talked about having slideshows, or just giving with the lyrics of the songs, or just giving parents handouts with the lyrics, so that you're sort of like passing along that knowledge to the parents so they can bring that to the home. And Jessica mentioned using a whiteboard in story time to write out, like if they're doing a song about dinosaurs, writing out the letter D and drawing a dinosaur, kind of using that to help with the language and alphabet. And she also had a great suggestion where she'd sort of run out of themes for her story time. So she started doing the alphabet as the theme. So like today was A story time, and talking about that, building the letter awareness so that the songs and the story and all were connected to the letter of the alphabet that they were learning. We talked a little bit about using sort of like sensory play things for pre-writing, or maybe some of the songs where we're using rhythm sticks or something that involves more fine motor skills, sort of developing those. And the play piece, some of the songs where we're sort of like acting silly, acting like animals or something like that, being sort of incorporating the play. I think that's covers most of the things we talked about.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And as you were saying that, I'm thinking, oh, yep, there's that stick song I remember doing, and I was shocked that no kid ever hit another one. But the tap your sticks in the air with a tap tap tap, and you could see the kids ultimately over time getting the rhythm and rub your sticks together, what that means using those words. Love that. The dinosaur song, we are the dinosaur marching, marching. All of that, even the term marching instead of walking or stomping. So I think you guys were spot on. So does anyone from group 2, Bethany, Dave, Emily, Hassan, I hope I pronounced that right. If I didn't, call me out. Maria and Tanya.
Okay, am I going?
Yes,
Give the
Steve.
Are you
rundown.
sure?
Thank you
Okay.
for volunteering as tribute.
Okay, cool. So we talked about a few different things. First, we had talked about some of the phonological things that Emily already mentioned with songs. And it was mentioned adding a narrative element to by stretching out the songs, like the wheels on the bus becoming the sounds in your house, and that also having like a sonorous element because it's rhythmic and its narrative. We talked a lot about initialing, or like when you're doing a craft in the story time, putting the first name of your first letter of your name on it, or initialing it, and that being a form of both letter knowledge. And Maria was talking about how everyone like really loves to initial their craft. So this kind of like print motivation. It's like, yeah, letters are so great. I had a lot of questions because I've been trying to think about ways to address like how you hold something.
Mhm.
So individuals were talking about having different shaped items. Also had some individuals where it had different coloring activities, and we're thinking about having coloring sheets that were related to specific letters. And for narrative, individuals were utilizing puppetry, and
Mhm.
then it being a very useful, and leaving those puppets out as a form of play and a way to kind of continue that narrative. And group, what am I forgetting?
Scavenger hunts. That was a
Oh
great
yeah.
idea.
So the
Love that.
scavenger hunts were really loved in someone's library, but that in future ones maybe attaching the word on it in order
Mhm.
to, which would be, I guess, print awareness.
Yeah.
Um,
It's actually so great that you said that. I know we all sort of do summer reading our own ways here. But if anyone, sort of got any of the iRead material and was looking through it, there's actually a really great activity around scavenger hunts where it puts a real picture of the animal and they're already pre-made so you can cut them out, and then facts and information about them. And the intent is to like hide them around the library. And as grown up and child find them, the child might recognize the picture with the name of the animal under it, but then the grown up can sort of read some of the facts and information. So we know young kids love them facts. I think that's great. And I don't know why scavenger hunts like that had never occurred to me, just sort of how that whole picture is paid in, right? So and that's the point. Like I hope that some of these strings are kind of connecting. It's a little bit of what we're already doing, but then adding a little bit of oomph to the why around it, I like to think. And group 3, Erica, Jenna, Millie, Vanessa, do any of you want to share your group? Oh, and some comments. Yeah. Oh, someone unmuted.
Yes, I can talk. I
Yeah,
guess
there
I
you
can
go.
talk. I don't, I feel like I'm kind of monopolized the conversation in the group too. So, uh, hopefully we're not too much. But we were talking a lot about using repetitive songs so that kids start learning the vocabulary and what to expect and what the words mean and all of that, and being able to sing along with the songs after a while because they're hearing the songs constantly and building up those words, that vocabulary. Um, Also incorporating playtime into the story times. And while playing, you know, pointing out, oh, this is a blue ball, this is a pink ball, and incorporating the vocabulary skills into that too. I had mentioned um, programs that I do with babies, where even with the littles, we're incorporating the shakers and the scarves, and making sure that they coincide with action. So like we shake and we stop, and then making sure that they can identify the vocabulary that goes with the motions so that they're connecting the two. Um, and then also having each child and caregiver have a copy of the book, so that they can read along with it and interact with the book itself. And um, I like to give out copies of the lyrics, like another group had mentioned that as well, so that the caregivers can follow along, and if they want to take them home, they can. Yeah, I'm trying to
Yeah.
think of what else did we cover in the group, guys? I don't remember.
Those were all the highlights, Vanessa. Thank you so much for that.
Yes, thank you.
And again, and I love that some of these are also helpful for, people who are still working on English, right? Being able to, know maybe the words to Mr. Golden Sun, but then sort of seeing them in print. I think that's going to help a lot of people in the room, participating from a lot of different experiences. I'm also thinking, of what you were saying, Dave, too, about how the little ones sort of hold their crayons or their markers or things. And sometimes there's a lot to that, right? Different dexterity needs for a multitude of reasons. Sometimes it's age, sometimes it's something else. And how we approach that, kind of like a universal design mindset. Something good for one can be good for all, but for different reasons. So thank you. Thank you for bearing with me. We're only going to have one more group thing. And if you can power through, I hope it's helpful to discuss with others and learn from others what they're doing. And then also share back while thinking about what you can implement in your own space, and then what that might mean for development. So now, as I mentioned sort of in the beginning, the Every Child Ready to Read sort of philosophy, this whole darn binder, which comes with a CD, by the way, which I had to turn into a Google Drive so people can actually access it. We have one computer in our building that can play a CD-ROM. All of this was actually initially designed as being for the grown-ups, right? So that when our little one goes back home, where at that age in particular, where they spend the majority of their time with that grown-up, where they spend the majority of their time, we're educating the grown-ups who then in turn can educate the child. So the initial design actually around Every Child Ready to Read Initiative 1 and 2 is to prep you, the librarians, for giving like a version of this presentation to grown-ups. And when I initially went through the training, the whole time I'm like, they're not coming. They're not coming, and I can't do that. Like I know, like I don't know, maybe. And I think I tried a couple of times, and some folks did come, and I'm sure it was really helpful for them. But sort of one of the thought processes around the Every Child Ready to Read initiative is how can we, and is it possible to instill this knowledge into the grown-ups in the moment? So yes, there's definitely a benefit. And if there's ever an opportunity to put together a presentation for the grown-ups where you're explaining to them, you might be tired of the play or might not understand, sort of what's happening, but here's why it helps develop pre-reading skills to help your child learn, right? This is not intuitive. Some of these terms and some of this knowledge is not necessarily something that you're born understanding. We all had to learn this, whether we learned it in library school or on the job, or whether you're learning some of it here in this moment. And that's even more so for like our accountant parents, like they don't know. So this was initially designed for that, but we've run into issues of just like, not issues in a bad way, but roadblocks of far be it the fact that my face might be lying to you, but like a lot of librarians are shy. And while I'm not a shy person, introverted, yes, shy, not really. That makes sort of the official presentation methods a little bit more difficult. And you got these grown-ups, they gotta work, man. Like they don't always have the time or the energy to come to these special grown-up presentations on phonemes. So how can we help educate them so they can better help their grown-ups or their kids and maybe other grown-ups? I don't know. One way, modeling, super simple. We probably already know we're doing this, but for the sake of my PowerPoint presentation, let's go over it. So essentially, when we are running story times, the crafts in particular, I really think there's a space for a lot of conversation around grown-ups and the crafts that we set up for our kids. Other literacy-based programs, though, there are opportunities for modeling for caregivers in the moment. I'm not sure how often you all have been doing a craft with your kiddo. Maybe it's like turning like a paper plate into like a wreath or something, like a spring wreath or fall wreath. How often sometimes the grown-up will take over because our kiddo is doing it wrong, or like, no, that doesn't go there, little Timmy, it goes over here, right? Sometimes like you can see it, or I've seen it, they can't help themselves because they want whatever the child produces to look like the model that we as the librarians may have made, which is not the point. And in Reimagine School Readiness, we kind of dive into play-based learning as well. But it's not the point for it to look perfect or just like the model. And sometimes those grown-ups can't help themselves but to start moving googly eyes and things like that. So in the moment when we're doing our story times, when we're doing our crafts, modeling the way that something is done for grown-ups, I think goes farther than we think. And if there is ever an opportunity to verbalize quickly what it is that we're doing, I think that's going to go farther than we think it is, because sometimes, even though our grown-up is watching us, they might not know the why behind it. So just before starting, right, like that rhyme, like fast, 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 slow, 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 right? So, just before starting that, like, okay, grown-ups, we're about to do this rhyme called fast, fast, fast. And, saying words while moving our bodies pairs actions to words, which can help a child's vocabulary and skills, giving them better language to communicate. And as we all know, language and reading go hand in hand. Okay, are you ready? Get your hands up. This is fast, 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 right? Even if it's just taking, and that was really a long sentence, but even if it's just taking a minute to say, okay, grown-ups, this is grown, and just saying, like, I'm not talking to the little ones, I'm talking to you, grown-ups, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, let's go. Because they don't always know. So then, another way or option to do that, and I think some of you are kind of getting there already, having like a whiteboard or something up with like the letter of the day, or something like that, or developmental tips. So developmental tips are basically like short sentences or activities paired with information that you give to the grown-up and send off with them. Right. So with these developmental tips, we share examples of activities that grown-ups can do with their kids out in the world, right? Like maybe it's like at the grocery store, something to sort of chill them out, that they recognize from what they've seen us do at story time. Sometimes it's like written on a little card and laminated and maybe given to the grown-ups, like every week, like a different tip or something like that. Maybe it's also written on that whiteboard. Today, we're working on the letter L, and it's all written out beforehand. And we're gonna do some, tongue ticklers, phonological, right? But just sort of sharing those developmental tips with the caregivers in a way that's sort of easy for them to sort of read and digest. And something that I've always thought was really fun is something like these cards that are up on the screen, is where you give the grown-up an activity, an example of something that they can do, and then a little line or two about what important skill this is helping to develop with a child, because sometimes they just don't know, and I think that sometimes that can be taken for granted a little bit, especially in the information age where you can, like, I don't know, these like grown-ups on TikTok are telling you like all the stuff and you're like, oh, thank you, parent on TikTok. But you know, we're in an age where in theory, you know, this information is all findable and accessible. But I think there's something to be said for the fact that many of these grown-ups, these cards can be printed out. That same link that I've been sending, I made this myself, like in Canva. So there are some that I have found, there are some that I have made, and I'm going to continue to do so and continue to add them to the Every Child Ready to Read page. If you look on the right, there are resources, and there are some of these that are just like print and lamination ready. I thought it might be helpful, you know, just again, I know we're all busy, and if we can at least sort of, you know, get the juices flowing. But then you can also personalize these, right? You can, if you know, or sort of are in that place where you're developing what your story time is going to look like that day, you know, like jot a couple of them down. Like if it's helpful, I can even like upload a Canva template or something so everything can be typed in. But because initially Every Child Ready to Read, yes, there is. Oh, thank you. I'm going to find that. Feel free, folks, to sort of Google it, but I'm going to find that PLA calendar and I'll make sure to link it on the Every Child Ready to Read page as well. See, group knowledge. This is why I like these. But because Every Child Ready to Read was initially designed to sort of help educate those grownups because of all the reasons we talked about a little earlier, whatever we can do and in whatever ways we can do it, drop that knowledge and information to these caregivers, I think we should at least try to do if at all possible. Posters, flyers, you know, like whatever. So our last thing, you guys aren't even going to be here for the whole 2 hours. You have some time to yourself. Our last activity is going to be that grown-up side. So you're going to pick, you know, a story time activity, song, rhyme, craft, whatever it is, right? Something that you would do for that early childhood age group, and write up a little aside, a tip or whatever that can be shared with the grownups. And if you guys write those out, if you sort of like get those out, you're welcome. If you want to email them to me, I will build them into these little cards. Like I will go ahead and do that and then upload it to the page. So it could be something like, what did I say here? I made these so long ago. I don't know. Oh, we talked about scavenger hunts, right? Like a sound scavenger hunt. Choose a letter and say that sound to your child. Send your child off, send them away to find an item that starts with that sound. Like, can you find something in the house that starts with the letter P, sound, like a picture or a pencil or Play-Doh? That's an easy activity that grownups can do with their children, or like with, you know, bored toddlers in the grocery store, you know, in the vegetable section. Like, can you find something that starts with an A for us to take home? Maybe they'll bring home asparagus, and then you've won on the vegetable front as well. But just something simple, or even if it has to do with a book that you're reading, but just a simple tip and aside that can be shared with grownups in your early literacy, like little events. So I'm for real going to give you 15 minutes. I'm even going in and changing the thing. And I will send you off into your rooms. There's a group of 5 and 2 groups of 4. And then make sure you pick someone who's going to share out. And again, you're welcome to, if someone's writing these or typing these and you want to email me in a couple days, I'm really happy to make these cards and then put them on the page for you as well to kind of help those of you who are interested in that. So I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms, and you all should be prompted. Okay, great. Who wants to share some of your asides? Group 1. You know, I'll mix it up. I'm gonna start with group 2. Group 2, Bethany, Emily, Hassan, Jessica. Do either one of you like to share?
It's me again.
Yay!
Yeah, so Bethany mentioned that usually she puts up a display of books on the theme that she read, the story time book, and then has a display of other books on that particular theme for parents to take home, which I think is a great idea. And we were thinking, because that's already something that's built into her story times, having a little take home right there near the books on display with tips about how to read together with your child, and tips on like modeling how to ask questions as you're reading a picture book after the parents have literally just seen you do it in story time, would be a great way to incorporate that. And then one other thing we were thinking about that was sort of like a easy take home was people talking about having the lyrics of the songs that they give parents. So
Yeah.
that's another opportunity, if you're already giving the parents the lyrics, to have on the bottom of that sheet some tips on maybe modeling, for the parent, like, touch your head when you sing about your head, or, those types of tips. And also some information about like the importance of repetition for young kids, because the parents, obviously, as they start getting sick of singing the same song over and over, having some things about that. So I think those were most of our ideas that we covered.
Yeah, I think that's great. We actually used to do that when we had workshops in person here at the Service Center 19,000 years ago, it feels. Any professional development books that we had, we'd put them up, and like clockwork every time. They were almost all gone by the time the workshop's over. So I think that's a great idea.
Oh, and one last thing, Bethany had the great idea of putting tips on the calendar. Like if you have a print calendar for summer reading or something like that, putting some of those like early literacy tips just on it, because she's found that parents often don't want to take like an extra piece of paper. So I thought that was a good idea.
Yeah, that's very fair. And I think that's a great idea. You're going to print them anyway, might as well throw a couple tips on there, especially if you can borrow them from the one at Waterford. Awesome. Okay. Group 3, Jenna, Michelle, Tanya, Vanessa. Anyone?
I can give a quick rundown. So it was very similar to the last group, but our side focus on skill was comprehension. And so our conversation kind of evolved through how to have children select their own books and the importance of them selecting their own books, especially if the parent thinks perhaps it's too challenging, the text, which you brought up early on in the discussion, and just referencing the science of reading research that shows that children need to have a broad experiences with text and ideas before they can comprehend. So, and that children inhabits decoding too, if children don't have something to draw on, information to draw on. So the importance of allowing children to select texts that are even seem too challenging for them, and that showing a caregiver how to like adapt a text so that the child can interact with it. Their interest may be more in the pictures, but you can have a conversation about that. You can use the text as indicated by that particular child. And just as we discussed this, we talked about children engaging with a text by pointing to their favorite part if they're very little, just showing that's a modeling on comprehension, because they have to comprehend it to make a decision what they like. And then as far as the cart, the theme cart, that's a great idea. We were a little bit broader in talking about putting a cart with multiple levels of books, so that the parents or caregiver can see that, we think that these books would all be a possibility. So maybe they might think they're all a possibility, even if they seem a little bit more challenging for the child, and, encouraged them to take a book off the shelves on the way out, the cart that we put up for the day for the story time. So I think that was most of what we discussed. I don't know if someone wants to jump in and add some more.
I think that sounds great. That sounds great. Awesome. Okay, thank you. And group 1, because we went a little out of order. So that was Dave, Emily, Erica, Maria, and Millie. And I
All
think
right,
it's okay if the ideas overlap. I just want to say that too. Go ahead.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk for group one. And this, I'll just say for myself, though, personally, this is a very helpful activity to remind me and reinforce the importance of focusing on the grown-ups, because so far I'm still in the early stages of my library career, but so far I've avoided a lot of in the heat of story time. I love to talk to the caregivers, but when I'm about to sing a song and I start to get a little verklempt, I don't make eye contact with the grown-ups, but I need to develop this skill. And so we spoke about, though I know I have been lucky to have a lovely group, because I'm working in a small group. So the caregivers that I've had so far are very engaged, but it can be a challenge when you have them who are not really participating. They're distracted on their phone. They really just want you there entertaining their littles. And so a great way to draw them in and have their attention and to reinforce your need for them to participate is to just make an announcement, part of your welcoming introduction for the story time or for the craft program, and repetitively just make it part of your always your welcoming words, and emphasize the importance of them there and how happy you are that they're there and ready to participate. And also, as we were using an example of a craft project, and if the children are trying so hard to make their craft look exactly like the sample that you made, it can be helpful to draw in the adults and prompt them to talk to their child about the different ideas, if they can create their own, make their own decisions. What do you think this can look like if if you're going to make it into something that's uniquely yours? And by drawing them into the conversation, then you're pulling in a lot of the narrative skill building. Some of the conversation can focus on some phonetics depending on what the topic is, and also some writing skills, and the fine motor skills are all going to be at play there too.
I love that. Yeah. And I think so often sort of craft time is overlooked, right? It's like we've gone through story time and we're like, oh God, okay, it's over. Here, let's go to this table and let's make this whatever. But we can still use sort of what's happening in that moment to carry on and continue the work that we're doing. And so often kids are coloring and crafting and things at home. And then, as you mentioned, sort of like with that repetitive nature of talking to the grown-ups, which is really hard. It's so much easier to talk to a 3-year-old. I don't know why. We can get them into the habit of building those things into their routine at home as well. And so we've got in the chat, I like to say during craft time, it can look however you want, or ask what they would like to add. Or maybe sometimes you don't make a sample at all. Right? Like maybe, the items are put out and maybe there's an end goal that's established, and how each child get there is up to them, which we also talk about in Reimagining School Readiness. Coming soon. I did it like 8 months ago, so it's about time to do it again soon. So thank you all for sharing those. And so just a couple of, you already hit on a lot of these, but just a couple of things, informal chats, when this information can be shared with regards to reaching the grown-ups. Informal chats, signs up sort of in play areas, just built into sort of the decorative nature of our children's section. Man, I completely forgot. This flyer is also from Reimagining School Readiness, right? Which sort of gives information on the importance of talk, play, body, brain science, and math. That training really moves sort of beyond ABCs and 1, 2, 3s and begins to embed a lot of other like really interesting facts into this preschool readiness as well. We already talked about literacy tips, but a suggestion that came up somewhere else were texts. I don't know about you all. I'm sure it's going to be very different area by area, but I know in the town that I work in, all of the schools already use the Remind app. I think in many of the daycares and preschools use the Remind app. So, the concept of sending out or building into sort of your routine literacy texts that maybe go out like once a month or once a week or something like that, which also helps with that paper situation for folks who don't want to take next the handouts because they're worried about so much paper and losing it. But there are some folks, I like putting things on my refrigerator so I don't lose them. You know, emails, putting information into your email signatures, like a literacy tip that maybe you rotate out once a month. Someone had the suggestion of actually, I think you can, the receipt printers with the book and the due date. Some of those receipt printers you can actually program to put a literacy tip on the receipt. So when that receipt prints out that you put inside the book, you can actually set it up so that you can rotate out different literacy tips onto those receipts, as well as some of the things that we're familiar with: blogs, websites, Twitter, and Instagram. So just a few last bits and bobs, some of the things that I had come up with, because I also want to make sure I do the same work that you all are doing. And that actually brings us to the conclusion of our workshop with 16 minutes to spare. Just a few random links. These are all also on the LibGuides page. There's also a direct link here to borrow the Every Child Ready to Read handbook if you want. Again, it's very much designed to set you up to present officially to parents and caregivers, but there's also just sort of a lot of helpful information in there. So if anyone's interested in flipping through that, we have like 3 or 4 copies. But that is it for us. So thank y'all for being here and sort of dealing with our wild rescheduling issue. I am going to stop sharing just so I can see everyone and not my own screen before asking if there were any questions or thoughts to share, or even different ways in which we can approach this, right? Different, I don't know, anything different that we can do for you all, or if you have any questions or thoughts to share out. Oh, thank you so much. Because this is sort of a part of, like I said, this new CT Ready to Read initiatives, there are going to be other things that we're offering. Remapping school readiness is one of them. It's kind of my favorite. Like, I love Every Child Ready to Read, but for me, remapping school readiness just hits different. We're going to be offering an actual in-person workshop on brain science, where we play this game called the Brain Architecture Game, where you actually sort of build what I call baby brains. But we're going to try to serialize sort of in a cohesive manner so that you all have one spot where you can go back to with regards to gathering and using this information, all on that early literacy, sort of preschool age training and development, including some region-wide workshops that we've got coming up on science of reading and things like that. So keep your eyes peeled on, those newsletters and things like that. I am always available. You can email me. Don't call me. I'm only in the office twice, or schedule a call. I'm only in the office twice a week. For anything, if there's anything that's happening that you want to talk through, nothing is too unserious. Sometimes I'm bored. But thank you all. Thank you all for being here with me. And I hope today was helpful. And in about an hour or so, you're going to get an email with an evaluation. Be honest, right? Like, I do read them and make changes sort of based off of your needs and your likes and your wants. But thank you all for being here, and I hope you have a good weekend. Bye, everybody.